Let's get Dooovid onto the call. So, Dooovid, how are you, sir?
Hey, great. Had already my computer set up. Usually, I have my computer in the other room and move it here to stream, but I just finished with Charles. So glad you're streaming early in the afternoon. I guess even before noon.
Great. So, what were you talking about with Charles Moskowitz?
Um, he just read that book by Sholem Dean. I guess not all those who go return. So we ended up talking about New Square and Hasidic culture, kind of from the perspective of individual or group rights, and especially as opposed to LA, maybe like New Square, where you have much more. I don't know what word you want to use to describe, but people who are more separate in the Judaism and have a different approach to Judaism, and less an assimilationist approach. Where we even have New Square, where you have a whole city largely of people that at most speak English as a second language, and try to create society largely based on their understanding of Hasidic culture. Maybe like we discussed the other day, are Jews down on ourselves? Like generally, that Jews are kind of down on our culture and our religion and prefer to live the way of the European Western man than our own culture. Then you look at like New Square or something like that, where you say like, no, we're going to set up and live our lifestyle the way that Jews should live it, largely uninfluenced by the West in general. So it was a kind of fun conversation.
And did you guys disagree on anything?
Well, we disagreed on everything, and I took the perspective that it's praiseworthy from obviously there's personal pain of Sholem Dean and whatever he had to go through or his family, but largely that it's praiseworthy that they ejected him. That and even from an American perspective, that as a rights, do people have the right to set up a society and enforce the rules and eject people who don't follow them? And obviously in America, like a business. Um, and then you look at a Hasidic community where they might actually eject somebody and not allow them back. Having that in America, is it just an exemption? Like Kiryat Joel, Lakewood, is it really something that all Americans do, or did America make a special exemption for Orthodox Jews? And if that's the case, should America allow basically everyone to do it? Like when we first streamed, I claimed my multicultural conservatism. I thought I was alt-right, and I wanted, like we have New Square and Kiryat Joel, that we were going to let white people and Indians and Muslims all make their own little like New Squares. But certainly that's not the direction that the alt-right took after Trump became in office, and even Trump didn't even talk, or no one in the administration forwarded it. But that was my initial vision, and I assume probably Charles probably somewhat is more compassionate towards America, helping Hasidim and Orthodox Jews preserve their culture. Me and Luke have argued this, and it'd be interesting to do a deep dive because it's really Hillary Clinton. And you're saying like New Square, as opposed to other sects, um, is it was really like a welfare state set up by Hillary Clinton. It's really her that did it. All the stuff with the education, and I mean, it was Jewish political lobbyists that pressured her to do it. And maybe a more there's a lot of interesting dynamics related to a lot of the stuff we were talking about. I mean, were you ever in New Square or Kiryat
No,
Joel?
no.
And I know, like, we also mentioned something interesting where like this guy Sholem Dean in New Square, largely feels unprepared and untrained for the world to be a businessman. Although I took I remember I told him when I was studying in Borough Park, this guy told me a few times, that from a rabbi saying, your average chassid in Satmar and Williamsburg understands business better than your average Harvard Business School alumni. And I joked about that constantly when I, like till today, like if people tell me like it's an anti-Semitic meme and I shouldn't do it, I don't even think so. I say like I went to a special school that trains landlords. It's called Yeshiva, and you sometimes say that about life insurance agents. But in terms like, no, I didn't go to Yeshiva to study to be a landlord. But I would say that there's a lot of things I learned in Yeshiva about being a landlord that you probably can't learn anywhere else in the world, including Harvard, including UCLA or any of these schools. And it's because Jews have a tradition of 1,000 years of being a landlord, and a lot of the Talmud and the business stuff, and also the training where it's, kind of, in yeshiva where there's dominant professions, and it's in like 770 produced more life insurance agents than anyone in the history of the world. Even though the Rebbe didn't encourage Chabadsters to go to university, he did encourage Chabadsters to seek a parnasa, and he endorsed the life insurance agent as a good method for Orthodox Jews to make parnasa a livelihood. And factually, there are tons and tons of Orthodox Jewish mortgage brokers, life insurance agents, and these various things. And sure, in LA, even though Orthodox Jews are probably relatively a pretty small fraction of the population, they, even in LA, I would not be surprised if Orthodox Jews dominate, even to use the word dominate, saying that if you're anyone in the LA world doing life insurance or mortgages, you probably deal with Orthodox Jews, and they're probably one of the dominant forces. And so I was going to push back and defend Orthodox Judaism and say, like, no, yeshiva training factually does turn people into extremely good merchants and landlords.
Well, give some examples. How does yeshiva training help one become a good landlord?
Well, I mean, one with the Talmud, even in terms of like a 12-year-old kid, saying like Elam Mitzios, usually, like if you find a lost object, you have to return it. But Nazikim, the section of the Talmud that deals with damages, is majority business law, and even the Torah. That a large fraction of the Torah is business law. So any kid getting a bar mitzvah, depending on their parsha, it's likely that there's quite a few things you're gonna have to know, like about what happens if you lend something and it gets damaged, or what happens if there's property damage, or these type things that, like, yes, if you're an 8-year-old Orthodox Jewish kid, you probably go around talking about the penalty for property damage or things like that, because it's part of our religion.
Yeah. Okay, there's a horrifying story out of Israel. A father murdered his son while in a psychotic rage. So Brady community in Kiryat Gat is reeling in shock from the murder of a 14-year-old boy by his father, who was apparently in the throes of some kind of mental fit. So anything about that story you'd like to comment on?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably an anomaly, and it could be it's a bad sign, maybe related to COVID or economic times. And you say that Jews are generally not violent, like relatively. I'm saying Jews could be violent. Obviously we have an IDF, but like on average, like Jews are largely less violent, and specifically Orthodox Jews. And so this is pretty crazy. And even, so to say, sacrifice his own kid like that. And it's unclear if he'll come out, if there's some reason, or if it's just that some guy snapped. And I saw this article, the guy was saying like he's Messiah or some crazy things. And like in Israel, people are pretty superstitious. I don't know about like in LA, but say even like reincarnation or some spirit entered him or something. So like within Hasidic culture, people could be like, no, it wasn't him. Some sort of demonic spirit entered him and did that. And it wasn't even him. It was just a demonic spirit that controlled his body and did that. Obviously, like LA, modern Orthodox Judaism, a rationalist approach, probably wouldn't look at it that way. But yeah, this is probably such a shock that most people would probably go with like the demonic spirit entering. If you had to take generally, you think Orthodox Jews in general, you think that we have a pretty good future coming towards us. That like we're Jewish, we're happy we're Jewish. Generally, Jews do pretty good in the world, and so you wouldn't see. And Jews highly invest in our children. Relatively, like even to secular Jews, certainly Orthodox Jews, they might have large families, but relatively, even for large families, the whole culture, like me and Luke have discussed many times, I keep on mentioning, there's a difference between counting in a minyan or being a member in a synagogue and enrolling your kid in their school. And like you might be counted in a lot of minyanim or welcome to be in a synagogue, but they might not enroll your kid in the school. Like just because you have a TV in your house they still count you in minyan, but they might not, let you, if you have a pet or something like that, they might not let your kid in their school. And, it's a sign of how much Jews invest in their children. So I say this is pretty shocking. I would say it's probably bad karma, and from an overall perspective of, like even like Sholem Dean, saying Sholem Dean in New Square, your average person in New Square, they're scared of the outside world, but they're not surprised if someone leaves New Square, leaves the yeshiva, and like ends up a millionaire, ends up doing good, ends up, in Hollywood, as Luke Ford has said many times, Jews generally don't lack in self-confidence or insecurity like that in many ways. So I mean, would you say this is like an anomaly, like very surprising, and you agree my assessment, like
Yes.
Judaism is extremely invested in the children, the next generation, that this is quite an anomaly?
Yes. Now, some Jews are much more likely to use their fists than other Jews. So Sephardim and Mizrahim much more likely to use their fists than Ashkenazim, and Hasidim are much more likely to use their fists than, say, modern Orthodox Jews or Reform or Conservative Jews. Would you
Yeah, I mean,
agree with that?
Ger in Israel is known to be from the most violent of the Hasidim, in terms of, I mentioned, like, smacking kids in synagogue or something like that. If you were in a very Hasidic circles, like everyone speaking Yiddish, it would not, you might see people right there in synagogue smacking their kids, and it's part of the culture. I'm not saying they're like horribly abusing their kids, but it's saying, like, if your kid doesn't show up during the prayers, you got to smack him. Like, that's just what you got to do. In like a modern Orthodox synagogue, I have never once seen a kid get smacked in synagogue, maybe at home. And, so there's all sorts of, but Ger, of all of the various sects, is known to, like even protest against Israel and their tishes. Like, there's tons of stories about people getting beat up when they go to the tish. You're saying, like, usually, like Hasidim and Orthodox Jews, like, it's like the Purim thing with Rabbi Boteach on the shoulders of Cory Booker or something.
Yeah.
But like people go into Ger and they get beat up in Israel, and say they get beat up by guys with payas and beards. And, so say, like, I was mentioning to Luke, like about those guys with the get. Most Jews, Orthodox Jews, I would say over half of Orthodox Jews have probably never thrown a punch, maybe never had any fighting training, period. But there are a lot, significant amount, of violent Orthodox Jews. And in Israel, they could, just because they have payas and a beard, doesn't mean that they're not going to use violence. It doesn't mean that they're not going to pray. Saying, like, a person could be violent and pray, and it's somewhat culturally, even among Sephardim. God forbid, here in the Sephardim, I fought a guy in front of the Aron Kodesh. Like, I mean, training, like wrestling, and the rabbi okayed it. It was something happened, but like, we fought right in front of the Aron Kodesh. And so, like, a Sephardic shul, you might see something like that. Where like Ashkenaz, like, that's sacrilege. It's like, no, like, we're Sephardic, like we're gonna fight right here in front of the Aron Kodesh.
So I know that you generally lean libertarian in your politics, but you're also an Orthodox Jew. So what do you think about secular society criminalizing prostitution?
I knew Jeffrey Feiger, who ran for mayor in Detroit. I mean, he's not an Orthodox Jew by any means, but he lives in the Orthodox community. And one of the things he wanted to do was legalize prostitution. And, generally, like me and Luke discussed, like Rabbi, you probably have no problem remembering his name, was Eleazar Doherty, in the Talmud, that prostitution is seen as a normal thing largely for the vast history of Jewish law. Like, it's definitely frowned upon, but there's a there's a term like zona or various thing that generally in Kabbalistic, even general straight Jewish law, it's a known thing that there's going to be prostitution within society. It's a known thing that there's going to be Gentile women prostitutes, and there's going to be Jewish men seeing these Gentile women, Jewish prostitutes. Is a known thing. There's going to be Jewish, female prostitutes that, to a non-Jewish or Jewish audience. All of this stuff is discussed in the Talmud. Like, it's not, a shock to rabbis that there's prostitution. There's whole, chapters in the Talmud about what happens when like a prostitute has a kid with in marriage law and these various things. So I mean, God forbid the Asian spa shooting. I remember I was in Manhattan, and someone asked me like, "Where's an Asian spa?" And I honestly I didn't know, and I called a Hasidic guy, and he knew where they all were, and so it meant you we don't want to make Judaism look bad. And he's saying historically, obviously, Luke's there in LA, the expert on the pornography business. Certainly, generally, Orthodox Jews preach large amounts of chastity, renunciation, not going on physical urges. Historically, like pornography has to some extent been accepted by some of the rabbis, like to encourage a person to be able to have relations with his wife. Historically, prostitution was a minor sin. For a Jewish man to see a prostitute was basically a minor sin. Like it's not becoming. No rabbis recommending it, although even historically, rabbis might have recommended. I mentioned in England today, the only form of legal prostitution, I think, is for like autistic or certain forms of mentally retarded, challenged people, that they have a government sponsored prostitution business, and that these retards get to have sex with prostitutes paid for by the British government. Are you familiar with that?
Vaguely.
Yeah, so there could be even a halakhic concept in Judaism where the rabbi would require you to go to prostitute. Extremely unlikely, but like maybe in terms of even like in LA, I mean in England, like for, but so anybody who studied Talmud or ancient Judaic literature is like no rabbi in their right mind would recommend or endorse it, but it's enough of a common thing that it's all over the rabbinic literature, and there's all sorts of stories and responsa and questions to rabbis about what I heard a modern Orthodox rabbi at YU. He was talking about his first day on the job. God forbid he came into a town and he wanted, just fresh and idealistic out of YU, and wanted to, teach everybody the glories of Judaism. And the first call he gets is, God forbid, one of his congregants had a heart attack at a hotel while having sex with a prostitute. God forbid, God forbid. But saying, okay, you're a congregational rabbi. Like you don't just teach Torah. You have to shepherd sinners. And then, like, should he tell his wife? Should he tell his family? Should he cover it up? Should the rabbi help cover up the fact that this man had a heart attack while having sex with a prostitute and not even tell his family and the congregation? Or these type things, which would actually be discussed in the rabbinic literature. So I'm sure they're Luke in LA. I'm saying like your rabbis that like they're pretty with it. Like I'm saying like rabbis are not surprised that people do really bad sinful behavior, but that usually they understand the dynamics, and God forbid, from the biblical, like rape in the Bible wasn't considered a serious offense. In a lot of cases, the Bible recommended marriage or even a penalty to be paid to the mother. I think like in Lebanon, there's still areas that follow the biblical rape law, God forbid. And so Jews have changed our culture to adapt Judaism as a religion to live by. And if Jews are following a practice that isn't working out, like polygamy 1,000 years ago, forcing rape victims to marry the rapist, God forbid, Jews have largely changed that. But prostitution, so I would say that Jews are more likely to legalize something like that. This is part of human nature. You have a Christian fundamentalist that might be, God forbid, like the spa shooter. God forbid, that he was like, you have to eliminate it. And, God forbid, like, how are you going to do that besides for cracking down, killing, jailing people that don't obey sexual purity? And, also mentioned on Charles that, like, just, I mentioned with Luke, like the kind of miraculous, to maintain virginity in modern Western society is almost, miraculous, even that Orthodox Jews have the ability to preserve virginity in such settings. But yeah, I would say it's probably more in line with Judaism, some form of legalization, some form of recognizing the weak nature of human nature, and to say humans are weak, and to try to completely, like censorship and we're always talking about, but also in terms of sexual sin, that the rabbis are definitely, we're right wing, we're conservative, but we're not like Christian fundamentalists. And there's usually some sort of recognition that an over, aggressive approach would lead to pushback. But obviously this is Luke's area of expertise, so I'm happy to let you preach on this.
And what would happen to somebody's reputation in their Orthodox synagogue if the word got out that they were regularly patronizing erotic massage parlors? Now, some synagogues would kick out a person for this behavior, but in all synagogues, somebody's reputation would plunge, and they would they would suffer socially if that word got out. What do you think would happen to someone if word got out in their Orthodox synagogue that they were frequently using erotic massage parlors?
I mean, God forbid. I would say in the business world, it's possible nothing. You're saying in the synagogue world, in the family world, and like you're sending your kids to school, like, yeah, no one in synagogue where there's women and children, like no women and children are going to endorse the behavior. But in the business world, no one's going to endorse that behavior, but it might be seen more that it's common and to cover up for the fact. And if it was, God forbid, I mean, saying that there has to, I was trying to explain that to Charles in terms of, like the pure, like in a more cultish, Hasidic, ultra Orthodox, being Orthodox isn't enough. You have to do everything that the group does, and just maintaining Orthodox standards isn't enough. And I was also arguing with Charles historically. My perception is that probably historically, most of the Jewish community was maybe half or a large fragment, maybe more than half, maybe only a quarter, was largely separate from the Gentile world. Like in Europe, didn't even speak the same language. Just like in New York City, most Hasidim speak English as a second language and live largely isolated, where the majority of the people they deal with are fellow Orthodox Jews, and it's largely the adult males that are expected to be, scholars, go to university, make money. And in those circles, there's an understanding of businessmen. Like Judaism, you have to do what's successful. Judaism is a religion to live by, and it's expected that people sin and fall short. You're not supposed to sin. And it probably says something about American culture, about world culture, or human nature. That I took a course called The Sociology of Human Reproduction at Stony Brook University. I read studies. There's claims that basically everywhere in the world, there's one prostitute per about 50 women. In some societies, it could be 1 per 20, and some as little as 1 per 100. But it's basically a given of society. And if people in the business world, God forbid, like Jeffrey Epstein, saying that they're crossing the line, but in terms of having extramarital or impropriety in their sexual affairs, is saying that there's a difference, and saying like, no, I think Luke is wrong. I think that there's a lot of people probably in LA that have their names on the side of buildings, and even Cobra Kai, the recent Sidney Weinberg, the father-in-law of Johnny in the new Cobra Kai, that he tries to blackmail him for like having an affair with his prostitute. And obviously his father-in-law is a rich Jew in LA, and he tells him, I don't care about my reputation, tell who you want. So I think in LA, certainly money is very powerful and a trump. And I mean, you're telling me that there's not people that's names are all over buildings that probably did some pretty perverted stuff, God forbid?
Oh yeah, certainly that happens, but it does not help your reputation. Now,
in the business world, you're saying that
no, your reputation.
Certainly in synagogue, but you're saying on a private level that he would still be respected among the business community.
Right. It wouldn't make any difference in the business community, but it will in the synagogue or the yeshiva community.
But I mean, they're saying they're not going to take his name off a building for that.
Correct.
Have you seen that? I'm saying all your time in reporting in LA, have you ever seen a guy's name taken off a building?
Oh no. And I was just driving down Olympic Boulevard the other day and going past Yeshiva Gedola, which is the most Orthodox, the most religious Lithuanian style day school in Los Angeles. And there's a big sign, the Donald Sterling building. And so Donald Sterling, it was a serial patronizer of hookers, and it was public knowledge. It became a big scandal circa 2004. He was essentially kicked out of the NBA, and but his name is still all over Yeshiva Gedola, perhaps the most religious Jewish high school in Los Angeles.
Well, I mean, because from a halachic point of view, the crime of seeing prostitutes is not excommunication. In fact, you're saying if a guy converted to Christianity, but I mean, there could be a shunning or an embarrassment, but like halakhically, I don't think there's any, say that the guy should have a ruined reputation, that women and children should look at him with fear, but that he should be ostracized or kicked out of the community. Like, no, I don't actually think there's precedence, and there's kind of an intuitive understanding. I mean, I'm not saying defending bad behavior, but that business people do not keep the standards of orthodoxy, as well as people protected by the community, and especially successful business people. It's presumed that they have to make some sort of exceptions to their Jewish behavior, or even like shaving, or calling an English name, or these various things. That if a person in the business world went to the rabbi and said that, I mean, I don't think a rabbi, certainly pornography has been approved in certain, not necessarily like no rabbi says watch pornography, but it's saying if you have a problem with like sexual addiction, chronic like masturbation, God forbid, or like your wife just doesn't attract you, like the most reason a person, God forbid, can't get an erection for their wife, that your average rabbi will endorse the use of pornography. I mean, am I right? I mean, that's Luke's expertise more than mine, but my understanding is like he's saying no rabbi endorses pornography like that. That like in general, or just saying it's a good thing to watch. But in terms of there are situations where rabbis will okay to people pornography, and there's no way a rabbi would openly endorse prostitution or even that type behavior. But if you're in the business world and you know the situation, and you're saying like, well, 90% of the people in this profession visit prostitutes, like working for Goldman Sachs. God forbid, like my guy who became a Hindu, he quit his job. Indian guy, Rastanath Swami, worked at Goldman Sachs, and his big client was going to be Playboy. And he said everyone at Goldman Sachs, when they were done with work, went to the strip club. Like literally everyone. He was the only one who didn't go to the strip club. And I don't know if Goldman or General, but it's saying like, yeah, traders on Wall Street. So if you were in the profession, you're saying like, okay, I don't know about them, I don't know about me, but I'm going to the base measures when I'm done. But there's something about the profession that is inducive to loose women in these things that no rabbi is going to. We talked about the get yesterday. So if it's in terms of a divorce, like, okay, this businessman, it cheated on his wife and was seeing non-Jewish prostitutes. So halakhically, that doesn't invalidate the marriage. And so this woman says, I want a divorce because my husband, God forbid, was cheating on me with prostitutes, that the rabbi could say, stay together. I make a case because no rabbi would ever, God forbid.
Okay, we got.
You
we
get
got
the point I'm making. But in that case, that the rabbi might even tell, like, no, I mean, you don't have to divorce your husband over this.
Yeah. Okay. So let me read a little bit here about the Atlanta shooting suspect. He sought treatment for sex addiction. A former roommate at a halfway house says Robert Aaron Long, the man charged with killing 8 people in a rampage at Atlanta area massage parlors, spent several months being treated for what he described as sex addiction. He regularly went to massage parlors for sex, and he lived at a halfway house for 5 months beginning in August 2019. And Mr. Long would regularly admit that he had relapsed by visiting a massage parlor to have sex with an employee. These admissions were always paired with discussions about his Christian faith and his relationship with God and his parents. Apparently, visiting these massage parlors tore him up inside. So the shooter repeatedly tried to stop himself from acting on his sexual urges. He used a flip phone so that he could not access pornography. His computer blocked pornographic websites. He even once asked someone to take his computer from him. Still, he could not stop visiting these spas. His parents knew about his addiction. They also suggested that he had lost a girlfriend because he did not stop visiting massage parlors. One day in the fall of 2019, the shooter asked a friend to take a knife from him, saying that he was worried he would hurt himself. He said, "I'm falling out of God's grace." Mr. Long told roommates, all of whom struggled with a form of addiction, that he'd gone to spas run by people of Asian descent. And he was asked if that was intentional. He said no, he did not choose them because of race. Just he thought the spas were safer than paying for sex elsewhere. Any reaction to the Atlanta spa shooter?
I mean, God forbid, people ask me why I never went back to New York, and saying like that's why I never went back to New York. Is like I remember what a perverted place New York was. Like it's really like it's a pretty mean, despicable, messed up place. I lived on the Lower East Side for over 2 years, right next to Chinatown. There were Chinese massage parlors all over the place, and I say thank God I never went to any of them. It's probably God forbid, kind of like in those Jet Li movies in L.A. With the African American, the Rush Hour movies, so that you go in and they're probably like all the women line up, and you pick one, and they give you a massage, God forbid, and like in New York, everybody who doesn't speak English, God forbid, knows the meaning of happy ending, God forbid. It's saying like I remember Second Avenue, like saying like there were always prostitutes, homeless women on the streets. Like at a certain time, there were certain areas in Manhattan. It was probably to do with policing. It's hard to know why, because like the police generally could keep it, but there's certain places in Manhattan where there were just always prostitutes, and most of them were in pretty bad situation. Usually, you didn't see Asian prostitutes walking the street. So from a God forbid, a sex connoisseur, he's probably right. Asian women are cheaper and cleaner. That they probably so from God forbid, a connoisseur of that, and is saying that as a man of God, someone who pursued Orthodox Judaism in New York City, probably in L.A., there are a lot more people who are connoisseurs of sex than there are of God, probably like 10, 20 times more. So, saying like I saw this day after day for years and years, living in Manhattan. And yeah, so if he's your average white, Luke mentioned when your pornography business that there's a racial aspect to prostitution, to pornography. So that it just in terms of economics price, this guy was going to an Asian parlor because it was the cheapest and the safest, where he didn't have to less worry about things like HIV and the various things. I don't know if is that explained. Does that?
Yes.
I mean, is that?
Yeah.
You're saying in LA that's how it is too. You're saying God forbid the people that you remember that connoisseur of these type things probably would have made the same decision that this guy made. God forbid.
Yeah. Now, do you consider the presence of, say, these erotic massage parlors? Would you consider them a blight on your neighborhood? How many do you notice in the greater Detroit area?
Well, I mean, the synagogue, like across when I went into Detroit to, try to inspire and spread Judaism, we had a synagogue to work out of, and it had a strip club right across the street. And the synagogue was run down, only opened once a week. We didn't even have heat. And the strip club had valet parking and spotlights, and there were long lines of people waiting to get in every night. God forbid, eventually got shut down, and they keep on closing business. But saying like, no, in Detroit, I saw for 2 years hordes and lines of people waiting to get into the strip club, and only a handful of people decided to come into the synagogue. And where I live in the suburbs, no, I mean the zoning, there's no strip clubs. You have to go into Detroit to find the strip clubs, more family suburban. But like in Borough Park also, there's no strip clubs in Borough Park. There are in Brooklyn. I remember off the BQE. Off in Brooklyn, there is a strip club, a few there, but generally there's not so many in Brooklyn. In Manhattan, they're all over the place. They're highly advertised off the West Side Highway, and thank God I didn't go to those places. A lot of Hasidim do. From a Hasidic point of view, it's better to. I mean, as I say, no one's going to endorse that behavior, but it's better to maintain being Hasidic and go to a strip club than to become modern Orthodox, shave, and off your payas or something like that, and be clean shaven. So just from a cultural way of looking at it, like no mother's going to be proud that her son did that, but if her son came home and it's like, I shaved off my beard and payas, versus found out that he visited a prostitute, that very possibly shaving off the beard and payas would be considered worse, and in some sort of greater calculation, that this is more part of the culture, God forbid. And I saw that living in New York, and certainly most Orthodox Jews maintain their purity, but like in Brooklyn, in New York City, where there's in LA, where there's a million Jews, there's going to, even Orthodox Jews, there's hundreds of thousands of Orthodox Jews. There's going to be a lot of them all over the place, and like OTD people, like half Galician, usually someone that goes OTD, exactly what it is that they weren't able to do when they were Orthodox. That's the first thing they're going to want to do. I mean, isn't that your experience, Luke? God forbid.
Yes. Now, I was asking about massage parlors. So you're talking about strip clubs. Are there plentiful massage parlors in your areas of Detroit?
Yeah, massage parlors are very popular here. And saying in New York, is saying that I think they're more, like you get more straight towards, God forbid, the strip club, or even in Detroit, that they're not so popular in Detroit, because they're saying that there's probably actually like 1,000 strip clubs in Detroit, even though there's only massage parlors are very popular. They don't necessarily have anything to do with the sexual impropriety, but the Asian massage parlors, especially like in Manhattan and Chinatown, a lot of them were they were basically prostitution. Even I forget, the Robert Kraft or something like that, like the massage parlor there. A lot of them are basically covers or even blatantly prostitution. But I don't know the percentage. It could be the minority, and it probably depends on the neighborhood, whether it's 50-50 or it's 25-75. And if it's 25-75, which way, I have absolutely no expertise on this topic.
Now, if someone was talking to you that they were thinking of going to an erotic massage parlor for the first time, and they just wanted to check in with you to see if you had any good arguments against doing it, what would you tell someone?
If they were a virgin,
Yeah.
I would tell them that it's likely to diminish their chances of having a happy marriage and even a large family. That God forbid, you say your best success chance for a good family and a happy marriage is when both the man and woman, their first relationship is with each other. So I can certainly say that I've warned multiple people on that, and so if the person's no longer a virgin, that may not make that much of a difference anymore. In general, I'm renunciate in general, so it'd be just like being fat or bad behavior in general. Just like there's no benefit to doing it besides for sense gratification. You're better off not doing it, and kind of like a weakness. In fact, when I was in Brooklyn, I used to make the point philosophically, like because in Brooklyn, OTD people, what they do is they go to Manhattan and they try to find women to have sex with, and saying that's what probably in LA, but like in Manhattan, that's what like half of the people do at night. They go out to bars and clubs and try to find women to have sex with. And so it's not like it's an anomaly. If you're a rabbi in New York or Detroit, that's what people are doing. But from that level, if you're in Brooklyn, and let's say, because most people who go to Manhattan from Brooklyn don't succeed. They go to a bar, they get a few drinks, they might not even talk to a woman, or it takes a long process to actually succeed in the endeavor. And sure, like, in LA, if you're fresh out of yeshiva, you're probably not going to succeed your first time going to the bar. It's going to take a little bit. But to say, even if you had a guarantee success, saying that if you're basically like a young man with high testosterone, you know what you're looking for, and you're saying that like no, you even if you had guaranteed success, that I would not go. Saying that if there was a woman, a beautiful woman of my dreams, in the city, that I would not make the trip. We're saying like no, then it's not the case, because most people make the trip just for the chance. And so if you're a Hasidic and it's bad behavior anyways, you say you don't want to waste a bunch of time trying to like date, meet a woman, and this, you just go straight to the strip club. So it's part of the culture that they're saying. An Orthodox Jew who say like it's not proper behavior, I don't really want to do this, but I can't control myself. It's more logical to just see a prostitute or go to a strip club than to try to go to a bar, meet a woman, and go through some long process of eventually trying to have sexual relations. And then if you're in Manhattan, there are whole sub-circuits of former Orthodox Jews and Jews in general that is basically like a big orgy, because saying that there's like 2 million Jews in New York, there's hundreds of thousands of Orthodox Jews. So in LA also, that you probably have these circuits of largely party scenes that are mostly fellow Jews, and in some OTD circumstances it could be like the same kids who grew up with each other, went off the derrick to each other. And probably LA and New York, like Detroit doesn't have such a big party scene, thank God, and it's mostly African American. But in LA and New York, party promoting is actually a very common thing for a former Orthodox Jew to do. That like saying if you're yeshiva dropout in LA and like all of a sudden you're big, it's like because I became a party promoter. And I'm sure Luke knows quite a bit about that.
Okay, I want to take a 5-minute break. Can you talk about some of the life lessons you've learned from coaching chess?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I'll just
Great, thanks.
ramble. Good practice to ramble. I always appreciate Luke doing the show. Like it's kind of like having a synagogue. You have to do it regularly and daily. And so if I'm sharing expertise on a subject or I make a stream, it's not the same as doing a daily show. And it's like running a business or having a synagogue. You have to have somebody there open for business doing it. So streaming, like Charles Moskowitz every day, 12 to noon. Luke streaming every day. So chess, definitely my passion. Very related to who I am. And it's interesting in Israel and in yeshiva because like probably I'm best known among Orthodox Jews as a chess player. And it's interesting because chess is extremely popular among Hasidim and Orthodox Jews. Although, generally they're not competitively strong at it. So I had played competitive chess as a kid, probably partly what made me know investigating my Judaism was worth it. Because saying why is I was a smart kid, went to good schools, had acceptance to good universities, and I decided to go to Israel and go to yeshiva. Part of my calculation that I thought it was worth it was because I traveled and I seen how good Jews were at chess. And I met Jews all over, and that made me more likely to see that there was something to be interested in. In fact, a lot of the yeshivas, and saying I was relatively pretty accepted into the Orthodox Jew considering my background. Maybe I became Orthodox at 18. I was still a virgin and was relatively hadn't made so many serious life mistakes because I went to Israel at 18. Maybe as comparison to Luke and a lot of the things he might have done or accomplished. Thank God I became Orthodox before falling into like that. But I played chess all the time in Israel. I didn't study it or seriously, but people knew I played chess, and a lot of Jews like chess. Like Rabbi Balkany, you mentioned him sometimes, interesting character. He had a chess set in his house. A lot of rabbis even had chess sets in their house, and even in yeshiva, it wouldn't be uncommon, for after Night Seder, after Marav to take out a chess set. So when I got back to Detroit, I came back to Detroit from New York, and ended up in University of Michigan. My best skill was still probably playing chess. Anyone who plays chess, I'm like a 2,000 rated player. So like Kevin Michael Grace was only 1,500. That means Dooovid could probably beat Kevin Michael Grace basically every game. And so I needed to make a little bit of money. Like I day traded and different things. I was in Detroit, and I didn't really have any education or marketable skill, But as a expert, former junior champion, I ended up coaching chess, and I did it for pay for a brief amount of time. An interesting character in Detroit. He had a place called All the King's Men Chess and Brain Games, and a Jewish man who had married actually multiple African American women. God forbid he was a nice man, but he was married and divorced multiple times. Currently, he's married to a nice African American woman. He married another African American woman, and he has a son from his first wife that married a Chinese woman. So he got a very big family that is quite mixed. And he opened up a chess shop, and he speaks a little bit of Yiddish. He's a fun character, Ed Mandel, and runs chess tournaments. So I started working for him, and he paid me. He paid me $20-$30 an hour to coach chess, because like he remembered me as a kid, and like he's also only like a 1,500 rated player. So the man who ran the chess shop, I could basically beat every game. So he hired me, and I hung out at his chess shop quite a bit when I was here, just because whatever that was where I hung out. I like chess. It was largely African Americans. Probably over half the people there are African Americans. The Jewish man who run the place, a lot of times his kids and stepkids would be running it, or manning the store. And then I got a hold of the Detroit City Chess Club. And so there's a Detroit Institute of Art. So it was a conglomeration of factors that I end up coaching chess in Detroit, largely volunteer. My mother is a prominent attorney, maybe in LA, people, Honigman, Miller, Schwartz and Cohn, big law firm in Detroit, the biggest law firm, had been mostly Jewish, secular Jewish for years. Carl Levin, former senator, retired, and now is a partner there. My mother, bankruptcy attorney, represented the Detroit Institute of Arts in the grand bargain. People know Detroit went bankrupt, and the museum, the Detroit owned a certain amount of objects that were worth over $1 billion, and the deficit. And my brother was also a state champion at chess, and he'd done a simul at the museum. But so they have a chess program, largely a whole bunch of factors at the museum, but it's mostly African American kids in public schools in Detroit. And so I started volunteering, like probably my liberal Jewish education, because I had a reform bar mitzvah. The rabbi, remember, I had to do like 40 hours of community service for my bar mitzvah. And for that, I went to a nursing home and helped make minyan for modern Orthodox Jews that helped eventually me become Orthodox in my reform bar mitzvah, going to the Orthodox nursing home. But the rabbi, my bar mitzvah, said, he didn't just volunteer to get his bar mitzvah. He's going to keep on doing it the rest of my life. Because honestly, at that point, I thought I was going to stop doing it. But no, I kept on throughout high school, going to the nursing home, volunteering, and largely I've always volunteered. And I credit that to my liberal Jewish education, because most Orthodox Jews don't volunteer like that. But I wanted to do something positive, not for Jews. I wanted to help out Goyim in Detroit. Mostly African American. Chess is extremely popular among African Americans. I was a junior champion. I know these people. I played these people as a kid. My brother was a state champion. So they let me help them. And so for years, I helped at the program in large kids. We have big, like on my YouTube, we had like hundreds of students, all levels, cleaning up, setting up the boards, teaching kids how to move the pieces, mating with a king and queen, king and rook, opening, going over games. But we had a gimmick, and maybe COVID-19 will get back, but the gimmick was basically that people going to the museum, we had chess. So we had our anybody at the museum, we had these boards set up and they're able to play chess, but we'd set these people up to play the kids in the Detroit City Public Schools. But people who don't know about chess don't understand that it's basically rigged. And so in the Detroit Institute of Arts, the kids, the African-American kids from the public schools basically always win. It depends on the one or different levels of strength, but there's a rating system, and anyone knows like a chess, if a kid, doesn't matter if it's an African-American kid who's only 8 years old and he's 1,200 at chess, he's going to be able to beat over 90%, or she's, actually a lot of these were girls, are going to be able to beat over 90% of a random person going to the Detroit Institute of Art to sit down for a game of chess. And if people don't understand chess, that even applies to like a doctor or a lawyer or a billionaire. Even the the mayor of Detroit, girl that I'd coached, she drew when she was like 8. Now she, Dan Gilbert, the richest man in Detroit, lost to a girl, African American, part Hispanic girl in Detroit that I had helped coach, and she beat Dan Gilbert easily. And from a chess perspective, it's not surprising. Anyone knows about chess would not be surprised that one of these African American girls in the chess program, beat Dan Gilbert easily. And so, from a chess perspective, that's what I did. And if
What do
you're
you
a
mean?
chess,
What do you mean when you say that the matches were rigged? You talked about they were rigged.
well, I mean, they weren't rigged in the sense that we cheated. I'm saying they're rigged in a way that there's a rating system in chess, and chess is the such type game where usually if you're 400 rating points higher, you're expected to win every single game. And so at a certain level of training, you could beat someone untrained basically every game. And so the kids in our program, they've been having intense chess training for years. Some of them from some of the best players in the world, from me, one of the better players in the state. So, I don't know if Luke plays chess, but if have you ever played in a chess tournament, Luke?
No, I've never played in chess tournament. I've played chess, but never in a tournament. I'm okay. I'm not great.
So say if you've never played in a tournament, chances are that there are probably at least 10-year-old African American kids that would beat you easily. And it's saying it's rigged in the sense that anyone who understands chess would know that we've taught these kids enough to have even actually lower, even a kid that maybe only had like a 70, 80 IQ, that even let's say, Luke, let's say had 150 IQ, but there's precursor knowledge and patterns over a few year period that are available to young kids that an adult on the spot would not be able to figure out. So if you sat down against a 10-year-old kid that had been training for chess and you just make a few moves and it's like move 4, you're like, oh crap, I'm in a worse position. And then you really try to think that at that point it'll be too late and the kid is likely to beat you. So I was saying it's rigged in the way that almost everyone thinks that they're going to win and they end up losing. So that's why it was such a great program. And even, from the chess perspective, I'm only a 2000 ranked chess player. So I'm not good enough to compete. Like I'm not a grandmaster. I'm not a famous chess player, but in terms of teaching juniors, I could train a junior to, even in junior high, and I'm pretty good at it, to recognize the patterns. And I even told, parents that enroll their kids in the program that within 6 months, your kid will beat the average museum goer. And I don't know if you would be skeptical of that. So if you were a museum goer and you would sit there and there's no way this little black kid's going to beat me at chess, but it's saying it's basically rigged from my perspective. Say no, you basically have less than a 10% chance of beating, this little black kid at chess.
Well, I don't think that it's someone with a 70 IQ, whether they were black, white, or Asian, is going to beat someone with a 120 IQ. But someone with, say, a 115 IQ who's received training may well beat someone with a 130 IQ.
I think you're wrong in saying no. A person with an 80 IQ that has been studying and playing chess for 3 years will, in fact, you'll beat someone with 150 IQ that has only been playing the game for a month. And it's like a video game. Like if you sat down to play a video game and you knew the person was retarded, but you hadn't played it before, and chess is not actually super complicated. There's nothing, more than addition arithmetic. Chess is basically simple geometric patterns. So there's a study. I don't know if you've ever met an autistic person that could do the calendar trick where you tell them your birthday and they tell you what day it's born on.
No.
I mean, I'm sure have you heard of the phenomenon?
Yeah.
So they have demonstrated that a 60 IQ is intelligent enough to figure out and memorize and do the calendar trick. It's not actually that complicated. It doesn't involve memorizing a huge amount of things, and but your average person, there's no way that on the spot you would be able to figure out what day, some day in the past, what day of the week it was. But someone who's already went through that and done it thousands of times would. And chess is the same way. That if you don't appreciate that your superior mental ability on the spot will not allow you to figure out the patterns that a person over a few year period of time. And it's even so if you're a chess player, there's a ranking system. And like I know this as a fact because I've seen these players over years in the rating. And so there's a level of IQ and there's also a level of training. And so yes, a person with an 80 IQ that has spent 5 hours a week playing chess for 3 years should be able to beat a person with 140 IQ that has only been playing a month, or even someone like Luke or something like that. That yes, I'm telling you as a fact that 80 IQ African American kids, and not just saying African American, but saying that like no, it's not because like I mean there are very smart African Americans. There's high IQ African Americans, but it's saying no, even the below average intelligent one over a period of time could recognize patterns in chess that even a very intelligent person stands no chance of figuring out on the spot over the board.
Okay, and what have you learned about, say, African Americans or African American culture from your time coaching them in chess?
African American, they have their own version of chivalry in a way that is saying that from chess you say like what does it mean to win, how you represent that. I'm not exactly one thing. I mean, I learned reactions from other people, learned just how the mind going about patterns. Also, I said a lot of African Americans are pretty down on themselves, pretty down on their chance of success. Although a lot of times you find African Americans have a lot of character, a lot of self confidence, even huge amounts of self confidence that your average person is kind of like no, like you're probably better not to have such big dreams. But saying like no, a lot of African Americans have a lot of dreams and self confidence, and also a certain amount of chivalry because we discussed this in the past that from a certain perspective like it's violence athletics the African Americans are best at, so that relatively there's a certain chivalry among African Americans that I think they regulate their violence and have some sense of fairness in a sense like I've never had a fight maybe in junior high school like but I've never had a physical altercation with African, and also African Americans believe in God and spirituality more than Europeans. Just factually, I've said this many times that atheism affects probably the blue-eyed man, including Jews, the worst of all peoples. But atheism is much more prominent in Europe, in even Northern Europe, and among African Americans. They're more respectful of religion, in fact, of God, and they're more open to spiritual messages. Probably that way in LA also, but in Detroit, church attendance is huge, and various things. And I sent you that article on Oons about the Nigerian players. Like, I never really bought it that they're. I mean, the IQ gap is real, the score gap is real, but I mean, factually, like I'm probably most famous as a chess coach, and our kids in Detroit are state champions all the time, and they beat elite white schools, private schools, Jewish schools at an intellectual game, chess, purely intellectual, and it probably means something. And there's also a group strategy type thing where because a lot of these black kids don't actually know each other. Saying like I'm a coach in Detroit, like most black people in Detroit don't know each other. So, but there is somewhat of a group strategy where there's an intuitive understanding of like a black group strategy, even among blacks that don't really know each other. And it might be a reaction. There's, I mean, like when I argued with the alt-right and started talking with you, that was my main tendency, that I actually feel safer and more comfortable as a Jew, especially a Hasidic Orthodox Jew, around blacks than whites. And I tied that largely up to my understanding, from Indians that I learned this from Hindus to express it in that term, but saying atheism as a disease, for whatever reason, is most contagious among the blue-eyed man. And I don't know if you agree with that assessment.
I'd have to think about it more. Now, you mentioned that you attended or you listened to, you watched the American Jewish Philanthropic Complex, a conversation between Lila Corwin Berman and Rob Reich. Did you attend that?
I didn't end up attending, and
Oh,
it
okay.
probably I had wanted to. I signed up for it, but at the end of the day, like I might not even been camera able to ask the question, and something came up, so I didn't bother because usually those are you can't actually speak or talk to the person, or even if you do, you have to wait till the end, and you're lucky to get your question. I like her. She came. I like her books. I have her first book. She wrote on the conservative movement, and then about Jews in Detroit. Um, but she's been doing research, even called the Jewish, uh, the effect of foundations and charities on Jewish culture and the shift in trend. And she's been sending out these dire warnings that Jewish organizations have to change their way about going through things. And she went to University of Michigan, the Frankel School of Judea Studies, that is kind of anti-orthodox. So she might be semi-anti-orthodox also, but she makes a lot of interesting points. I'm not sure if you ever seen her or familiar with her
No.
books.
No. Okay, let's revisit the topic we discussed on Monday and see if we can have some new thoughts. So I want to read a little bit from a website called fakenews.net, and that's nous.net. This is an essay by a philosopher, Michael Huemer, and it's titled, "What's Wrong with Attacking Our Own Society? Why Are We Ethnocentric?" Almost all societies have been highly ethnocentric. They teach their members that their own society is the best in the world, that their values, their institutions, and their traditions are the morally correct ones and better than those of any other society. Of course, these beliefs are, in general, false. Most societies are not the best. In fact, most have incredibly awful values and practices, such as throwing virgins into volcanoes, attacking neighboring tribes for fun, enslaving people, etc. So why is it that they all seem to be convinced that they are great? Maybe it is because cultures that do not strongly endorse themselves are not stable. People don't believe their culture is good. They aren't loyal to that society. They won't act to preserve it. They won't sacrifice their interests to follow the social rules. Maybe those societies fall apart, get taken over by other societies, or they just keep changing until they reach a stable, self-endorsing culture. That would explain why we don't see a lot of highly self-critical human cultures. So is there anything on this topic that you'd like to add that we didn't already cover on Monday? And let's see, we seem to have lost Dooovid. Let's see what's going on. Oh, Dooovid, did you hear me?
I'm here. I just went to my refrigerator to get a drink.
Oh, okay.
I was listening the whole time. I just stepped to my refrigerator to get a drink.
Okay. So do you have any new thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I'm kind of. I mean, I agree to some extent, and you want to say like, culturally versus the individual, that I'm actually skeptical that there's some sort of natural inclination to think that we're the best, and that might be somewhat unique to Jews or history or empire. That if you're part of a civilization that at one point was dominant, maybe like you're Chinese or, and I mentioned the Indians that. Or even defeated peoples, the Jews as defeated people, were kind of down on ourselves. That you say, like, how could we be the best if we were so utterly handed and defeated by the Germans, by the Romans? And that, I mean, obviously the basic psychology is there, this tendency, but I think there's the reverse element also. And then in Perky Ovos it says simple, who's a happy man, and one who is satisfied with his lot, that the secret to happiness is to accepting our lot, whatever that means. And I know, for example, this woman, daughter of a guy I sit next to in synagogue, that God forbid, had breast cancer, opened up. She actually had Ebenstein had an article in the New York Times about an organization, breast cancer, bringing Palestinians and Israelis together. And she mentioned how this Palestinian woman seemed, from her perception, weathered the pain so much better. Like she just kind of accepted that this was her lot, as opposed to her, the American Jewish woman, well educated and wanting to medicine and breast cancer awareness, versus the Palestinian woman who just accepted that this was her lot and the suffering so much easier. And I think there is that tendency of people to accept their lot, to accept their suffering, and it's just like we're mentioning speaking English versus Yiddish. Uh, you switch from Yiddish to English because you want to be the best, and speaking Yiddish won't allow you to be the best. Or India sets its government up, and English is a national language because they saw the Anglos uh, were capable of setting up a superior culture, and that in India they're probably better off setting their culture up according to the model of the British than their own. And I mean, that's what Reform Judaism is about. Like now, because it's hard to say like what is a Jew, but like factually, people, Jews are really down on our own culture, and you say like wearing tefillin, all these rules in the halakha. If that's what it means to be Jewish, most Jews are running the opposite way. Like I was mentioning, years like the strip club, long lines, the synagogue, only a handful of people ever had. Uh, Interest, even from a Jewish level. Like, what's that going to get me learning about my own tradition? And you're saying even a Jew who doesn't care about their own tradition is saying, even though I don't care about what it means to be Jewish, I still think I'm the best. There might also be that tendency, just ethnocentrism, like an Indian in America that doesn't know anything about Hinduism, thinks that they're the best, because they're Indian. But I doubt it because there's social, Luke with blue eyes and being an Anglo, he could just walk around and see that most of society was organized according to his ethnic biological group strategy. Just like if you're a Jew in Hasidic places and everyone's speaking Yiddish and doing this stuff, you're saying like, great, everything is set up according to my group strategy. So if you're, a dark-skinned person or a person, a minority, and you look around and you say society is not set up at all to accommodate my identity. In order to be successful in society, I have to change my identity. That those people don't think that we're the best. Those people think that they're down on ourselves.
Okay. Do you think if there's a strip club across the street or a massage parlor across the street, that it creates a impurity that can contaminate a synagogue?
Halakhically, no. I mean, even if it was a church, it'd actually be more of a case. Even if the synagogue itself had been turned into a strip club, um, like for halakhically, like a church would be way worse, because like a house of a zona, or they call it a house of immorality, isn't the same as a house of idol worship. And no, I mean, at this point, the strip club has been closed for a few years. That it's been gentrified. They built a building. The synagogue has largely been fixed up, so it was just a temporary thing in time where the synagogue was run down and the strip club was dominant. But no, long term, the strip club met its demise and has been destroyed, and the synagogue still is not that popular. Like, it's not that many people really care about Jewish education, or learning about what it means to be a Jew, or chanting or praying, doing all those things, unfortunately.
Okay, great. Dooovid, is there anything you want to add before I move on?
Yeah, I appreciate you talking. And actually, I came to some clarity just from you mentioning that. It's like, I think Jews really are down on our own culture. And it's like, me as a half Jew or a proud Jew who likes doing things. I dressed Hasidic. I had payas. I always wear my yarmulke even at payas, and dressed Hasidic a while. And unfortunately, Jews are really down on our culture and saying, okay, the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, um, the allure of success might be out there. And I love being Jewish, but there's a reason why I'm talking to Luke, and saying like the zeal of a convert, the zeal of a born again Jew, and and it could even be how rabbis use converts or Bali Tshuva or half Jews, is to kind of reinvigorate other Jews, because your average Jew, I don't think, is really that excited about. I mean, they're like, certainly in Jewish culture, Jewish organizations, you're not going to get to the head of being a Jewish organization if you feel like that. But like the masses of Jews, I think are pretty, and probably even the mass of your Jewish viewers, the people, the Jews who watch Luke Ford, probably down somewhat on our own culture. So I'm not sure if you agree with it, but I was thinking about that, and just from my own perspective, my own family, the Jews I know, the Jews that I've tried to share my love of Judaism with, and it's hard to change Jews who are down on our own culture.
Well, it seems in general it's just part of the human condition that very few people feel grateful for that which they are born into. You have to take something on as new or to lose something before you appreciate it.
Oh, great. So, maybe next week or, Shabbat Shalom. And me and Charles were back today. We streamed. I saw Lowell Gallon. Looks like he's back around. So hopefully, he streamed on another channel. So hopefully, that might be back into full swing. And so if you're, um, I'm always happy to talk about
Right.
Judaism and really, like when I mentioned to you like a year ago, is we got to train. You want new guests, you really have to do it yourself. Like you can't expect to have new guests if you don't teach them the sound. It's like Luke. The reason I'm still with you is because you got me my mic and you taught me how to do the sound, and it probably is that way. You probably, if you want guests, you actually have to teach them how to do it. That's why it's so hard to
Yeah.
get guests. But at least Jennifer, hopefully a few people, we'll try to do that and get a few people like Gandalf. Like Gandalf has a lot of potential, but like he just couldn't get it through his head that like there's no exception for not having good sound quality. And I got quite a few people like that where I think if they got past the sound quality issue, they would probably be ready to